Hello and welcome to the latest EnvCast episode. EnvCast is a Society for the Environment podcast, bringing you environmental professionals in conversation each month. Our podcast is designed to provide insight into the lives of registered environmental professionals, featuring experts from across a wide range of sectors and disciplines. We explore what they do, why they do it, how they got to where they are now, and their future ambitions. Each guest is registered with us as a chartered environmentalist, registered environmental practitioner, or registered environmental technician via one of our professional body partners, known as our licensed members. As such, they have each been externally verified to confirm that they are committed to good practice in their environmental work. To learn more about the Society for the Environment, our environmental professional registrations, and our licensed members, please visit socenv.org.uk. That's SocEnv.org.uk. Welcome to the May 2022 edition of EnvCast. My name is Phil Underwood. I'm the engagement manager here at the Society for the Environment. I'm delighted to be joined today by a true leader in all things ecology, which makes me very happy that she's chosen to use a photograph I took of her for her LinkedIn profile, which makes me very pleased indeed. I'm, of course, talking about Claire Wansbury, a chartered environmentalist via her membership of the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, known in short as SocEnv. So a huge welcome to Claire. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
You're quite welcome. To briefly add to my introduction to Claire, Claire was a highly commended finalist in the 2020 Environmental Professional of the Year Award, which saw a tremendously high level of competition that year in particular. So I thought I'd mention that as a well-deserved and a congratulations again before we move on from that.
Thank you.
It doesn't seem like 2 minutes ago, but to kick things off in the traditional EnvCast way, please could you tell us a little bit about what you currently do as a career?
Yes, thank you. I'm an Associate Director of Ecology within the environment practice of Atkins, which is, I imagine many people will have heard of Atkins, a large engineering and environmental consultancy and a member of SNC-Lavalin.
Okay. And we're going to stick to the topic of your job in general and explore that a little bit further, if that's okay. What are your expected tasks in the role that you do now?
What I do now varies very greatly day to day. A lot of it is now, as an ecologist, you think, well, they're going to be out in the field the whole time. I've reached the point in my career where I tend not to, but a lot of my work is advising more junior colleagues, reviewing their reports for them, which to me it's a sort of double bonus because I get to see the ecology, learn about the sites that they've been to, and help with shaping advice, but also helping them develop their own understanding and careers. So it's an interesting mix. But alongside that, I'm involved in thought leadership. So exploring some of the new concepts. Through most of my career, I've worked on what I've started calling traditional ecological consultancy. So where there are newts or badgers on sites, how to work around them safely, that sort of thing. But over the last decade, I've worked a lot on some of the novel approaches like biodiversity net gain and natural capital valuation. So part of my time is helping clients explore what that means for them and actually helping develop thinking about what's the right thing to do for the UK policy on those topics.
Okay, so that goes as far as UK policy and so on. So it goes beyond maybe Atkins and so on, towards national policy, which I guess feeds obviously back into the work of Atkins and the direction that they go in.
Yes, there's so much going on at the moment. It's great to be part of those conversations, and it is important.
Okay. And you mentioned that you're not necessarily going out into the field as much these days, but that was part of your journey to where you are now.
Very much so, yes.
Okay. Do you miss it?
yes and no. I love being outside. I love seeing the wildlife.
Mm.
The alarm going off at 3 a.m. to do your morning bat survey after an evening bat survey is one of those experiences that there's definitely pros and cons to. And the cons are it's 3 a.m.
Yes.
The pros are it's amazing what seems funny at 3 a.m. when everybody's gathered in the hotel lobby to go out on site.
I can imagine so.
But yes, so there's a lot I do miss, but also I'm fortunate. Ecology is one of those topics where it's a personal interest as well as a career one. So it's not that I'm not allowed to go out and do bird watching and things anymore, but it's things that fortunately are still very much an interest for me in hobbies as well as through work.
Well, I guess through the higher level of, the policy side of things and things like that, that you're still making a difference in those areas, whether you're there on site or not, I suppose.
Very much so, yes.
Okay. And I'm very interested in what you said at the start of that answer, which was to do with supporting and developing your colleagues. Now, Atkins are one of our employee champions.
Mm-hmm.
So Chartered Environmentalist Employee Champion. And a huge part of that is developing your core environmental staff and your teams that impact on the environmental work that you do, or the not necessarily environmental work, but the engineering and that kind of thing as well, which clearly has impacts. And the fact that you're supporting colleagues in doing that, is that a rewarding part of your job? Very
much so, yes. And I think I noticed you mentioned the people who aren't directly working on the environment. Yes, absolutely. These are topics that our engineering colleagues have to have an understanding of as well. So, through all my time at Atkins, I've done things like wildlife awareness, lunchtime talks, things like that. But actually now, as there are new approaches, then suddenly there's added complications, added ways of thinking about things, but also very positive ways of thinking, because for so much of my career, ecology has been one of the very constraint-focused topics. So it's, as I mentioned, the newts and the badgers and things. How do we work around this problem of wildlife on site? That's such a negative way of looking at things. Whereas actually, if we do the right things for nature, in the same way doing harm to them can harm our economy and society, doing the right things for nature benefits our economy and society. And I think most people care. And suddenly there's an eye-opening moment of saying, hang on, I'm allowed to care in my job. Not just allowed to, expected to, and it's good business sense to look after most sensitive areas for wildlife, to see what we can improve. It's not just good for nature, it's good for business. So that way of thinking, that way of talking has been a really positive development.
Absolutely. And that's a huge thing that the Society for the Environment supports. We're very aware that we have, there's nearly 8,000 chartered environmentalists, for example. There's people you could possibly term as core environmental professionals. Ecologists would probably fit under that. But then there's also a good few thousand who are engineers and scientists and so on, who their core role isn't the environment, but the impact they have on the environment is quite significant. And the fact that they have chartered level knowledge in environmental considerations and so on, and they're able to make the decisions that best impact the environment. That's a wrong way of phrasing things, but you understand what I mean.
Yes.
But there's a group of from all sorts of different sectors and disciplines who are all working towards the same goal.
Yes.
It doesn't matter whether they have a core environmental discipline that they're working in. So for someone thinking that your job is up their street, that's what they want to aim for. If they wanted to get into your position, and we've mentioned the fact that you've been, your journey was working in the field of ecology and things like that. Could you give an idea of the requirements that were needed for your current role?
Sure. I suppose going back to the start, I did a biology degree and then a master's. And degree or master's level education is certainly very much expected. But for people starting out in their career, everyone's looking for experience as well as qualifications. And I think it is really hard. There's so much to do. There's the financial worries for students these days. But actually getting the experience, going out and volunteering for somebody like a local wildlife trust, if they're interested in ecology, you're doing something very positive. Also, you get to find out if it's really what you want to do. Because maybe somebody loves the natural environment, but suddenly when they've been out a bit, they think, well, I'm more of a sit at a desk sort of person than a boots on the ground. And that's fine. Everybody's different. So getting experience helps you explore what's right for you. But also, I think you look back over my career, and honestly, it looks like I've got this carefully planned succession of jobs. And it wasn't. It was just when I needed to move on to the next job, what was offered to me.
Yeah.
And it's worked really well. But I think for people starting out now, one of the risks in ecology is there's a lot of need for field workers. So out monitoring works on the big projects while vegetation's being cleared, make sure the protected wildlife is safe. And it's really important. But you can see people's CVs where they've almost got stuck in that. And you can develop in a very, very field-based role, but you need other skills as well. You need report writing skills. And that's one of the areas where if somebody's early in their career and they're out in the field the whole time, they're listening to this, talk to your employer about what you can do to get engaged with the report writing as well, because otherwise there is a risk that you'll see other people progressing and you're thinking, why aren't I? And it's because there's a gap. And also being interested in those things like policy developments, because there are changes going on. There are changes in the way we do field surveys, new technology, old technology. One thing we've been very successful in over the last couple of years is introducing the use of wildlife detection dogs to look for grey-crested newts. And when everybody's talking, it's got to be drones, it's got to be tech, that feels like it's the opposite. But actually, there's no technology that can match the nose of a dog for scent recognition. So it's in the same way that a drone or an eDNA, looking for environmental DNA to pick it up in water bodies and things, those are amazing advances. Actually, the sniffer dog is one of those things where that's the best tech we can use at the moment.
Yeah. And that's bringing in the, I guess, you're harnessing what nature is offering, I suppose,
yes.
in a way.
A different way of working with nature, yes.
Yes, absolutely. Which is interesting to get your head around a bit. But it's good to hear that kind of thing happens. Having said that, I do love drones, but I won't go into that. And so to pick up on a couple of things there, you mentioned that starting in the field and staying in the field work is absolutely fine and a good way to start and a good way to progress still. But in terms of learning those other skills and whether it's developing your managerial skills or the report writing and things like that, is that part of where SocEnv and organizations like that and membership of those organizations can help with the learning opportunities that they offer?
Very, very much so. There's some good courses, yes. It's not just, and again, it's that resisting the temptation to go, oh, I want to do lots and lots of field survey courses. Of course, those skills are vital to learn, but making sure that people are also looking at the templates and going on the courses about the processes like ecological and wider environmental impact assessment. It does take some thought, and there is a lot to learn. And also going out and being active in seeking those opportunities means there's the opportunity to just engage with lots of other people who are at different stages progressing on a similar career route. And there's so much to learn. And one of the best ways is just learning from each other.
Okay. Now, the answer to this might be interesting, but you're a chartered ecologist, and then you became a chartered environmentalist. Was it in that order?
Other way round.
Other way around, was it? Okay. Interesting. In that case, my next question might not be particularly relevant, but you've clearly mentioned that as an ecologist, you might be out in the field collecting data and that kind of thing, and I guess that's part of a core ecologist kind of role. And as a chartered ecologist, it's clearly focused on ecology, whereas as a chartered environmentalist, you have to have a broader knowledge of different environmental impacts. And I wondered if that was a consideration of why you went for chartered environmentalist as well as chartered ecologist.
I think because when I became chartered environmentalist, there wasn't the option of being a chartered ecologist. Sign was IEM. It didn't have its royal charter at that point. Getting chartered it's one of those fundamental steps of professional recognition. So it's important in itself. And you might say, well, was the other way around, saying, well, then fine, you then said, okay, now chartered ecologists available. Why did you keep your chartered environmentalist? And for that, it's because exactly that point about that wider environment issue. Ecology covers such a lot of ground. There's so many bits within ecology itself. But even then, if you just look at ecology, there's a risk of being potentially too dour because there's so many other things. And it's about potential harm. Very simplistic level. If we say, well, we're going to dig a great new pond here for the newts, if we haven't thought, maybe let's check with the archaeologists. We're doing something for very, very good reasons, but we could actually do damage if we're not aware of those wider considerations. But also it's looking for the win-wins, where you can do something that's great for some habitat creation that's helping with biodiversity net gain, but also depending on the site, what's right for that location. Then potentially you could also be helping capture carbon, mitigating climate change, or helping in other ways like improving flood resilience, which is about helping with problems that are there now, but also, again, the sort of issue that's going to become more severe. So adapting to climate change. So bringing all of that thinking together. And it's one of the reasons I really like the natural capital approach, because you're looking at the natural environment, but you're not thinking about it through a single lens. You're thinking, well, what are all the different benefits that this could be providing?
And that brings me on to my challenges question very nicely, I think, because taking all of those different possibilities into the equation of a decision is a challenge in itself. So what are some of the challenges that you face within your role?
I think that, yes, there's so many different factors. And every specialist, I'm an ecologist, so I know that actually ecology is the most important of those things. But so does everybody else if they just got that specialist. So somebody has to find that balance. And it's important not to have the right people in the room to inform the decision. So I think that's the big thing with that. But also, turn it on its head and say, where are the opportunities?
Yeah, which I imagine there are plentiful opportunities.
Yes.
And technology and advances are helping to reap the rewards of those opportunities, I suppose. But I highly imagine there's still a reasonable amount of hurdles to jump over to be able to get some of
there's still a lot of sort of business as usual mindsets. And there's been a great improvement in understanding of the urgency of the climate emergency. But the fact that we've got a nature loss emergency, a biodiversity loss, is as big of a global issue. And also that thing about lots of different topics, we're not going to solve those one at a time. We've got to look at both.
Absolutely. Are there any particular project highlights or career highlights that stick out that you're able to share?
I've got one that was a few years ago, but is now sort of coming to fruition, is, about 8 years ago, when we were first, as a company, starting to really work on the concept of natural capital valuation. We did a study for London Wildlife Trust of their Camley Street Natural Park. And that was something we were able to do for free because we did a funding model where people's time, part of it was covered by our in-house innovation commitments, but also people using the volunteering days that Atkins allows them, and some people using training time as well. We were able to do it for free. And it was actually one of the first times people had really challenged the valuation process for urban areas. Because a lot of the reports, they'd say, well, here's the value in terms of food production. Here's the value in terms of flood alleviation. And then when you get onto the types of value that are soft ones, more people focused, so recreational value, health and well-being, you'd often see the report would just have a sentence that said, we didn't look at these. Too difficult. In a really urban context, that undervalues areas massively. So in terms of the professional side of what we were doing, that was one of the things we were trying to work on. But why we did it was because Camley Street National Park was created in the 1980s, and it was an incredible visionary approach, saying we need to, yes, have the amazing nature reserves out in the wildernesses, but we need nature where people are. And that was the driving force behind it. But despite the fact that it was surrounded by, it's in the King's Cross area, so a lot of major development around there, but it wasn't getting funding coming to the Wildlife Trust for the reserve. And the visitor centre needed replacement, and it needed some work to make sure that with more people living locally and therefore more people using it, it was going to be future-proofed to look after it. And so ours wasn't just an academic interest study. The purpose was to say, here's a report that will help tell the story in a different way and help with looking for funding. We deliberately did it as a long report plus a little glossy brochure that was like an investment portfolio thing.
Right.
And that was one of the pieces, with a lot of support from others as well, that helped the Wildlife Trust raise over £1 million of funding. And the new visitor centre actually opened to the public last year, but in May, it's having its official opening event.
Fantastic timing.
If all goes to plan, I'll be popping back there for the afternoon, seeing what it all looks like on the ground. So that's something where we were, it's funny because I can't believe it was that long ago, because a lot of companies are now getting into natural cap and thinking, well, how do we do this? Realising we've been doing it for a while, but also seeing that's something, actually quite a small piece of work, but it helped unlock that funding. It made a real difference. So if people are saying, well, why do you do that? It can change decisions and it can make them more positive. So that's one of those real highlight things where it's just, I love that. I love the fact that we were able to be part of that story.
That sounds fantastic. And you're seeing other projects follow suit in a similar kind of way now.
Yes.
Brilliant. Well, that's good to see, because it's not all about just that project, is it really? It's about moving things forwards more widely, which is very good to hear. And I hear a lot more about urban parks and so on these days, and the benefits that they have in so many different ways. And obviously they were vital during lockdown for COVID and so on, for human activity and that kind of thing. So they're
absolutely
vital.
Yes.
We're going to move slightly away from your specific role, although having said that, your role might have a reasonable amount of involvement in this, but COP15, which is coming up. And the topic of COP15 is heavily related to your career. And it's on the horizon. It's happening, well, hopefully happening in October, I believe.
Yes.
In China, and I forget the city or region it's being based in. Could you first explain what COP15 is? Because I know it's a huge interest of yours.
Absolutely. So for anyone who's listening wondering, hang on, I thought we were on COP26. Just to be clear, COP26 was last year, and that was the bring together the international parties on climate. So COPs, the Convention of the Parties, you have those under various pieces of international commitments. So that one was climate. This is about biodiversity. And what's going to happen is COP15. And yes, the in-person event is due to happen in China. The event actually started last autumn with an online launch. And at the moment, there are negotiations going on around the world. And the aspiration is that it's been described as hopefully being like the Paris event for the climate agreement, that people really come together and do something, make some firm, positive commitments. There have been commitments in the past. This all comes from the Convention on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services from Rio in 1992. So it's progressed since then. But there were the commitments that were made that ended in 2020. There were a lot of ambitions, there were a lot of targets that simply weren't hit. We know the problems are getting worse. They need to be improving. And what we're in now, the United Nations Environment Programme have called the decade up to 2030, the decade of restoration. And what's unfortunate is, totally understandable with everything else going on in the world, the delays have meant that we're already 2 years into that decade. So there've got to be agreements, there's got to be vision, but there's also got to be action. And also, actually, we know a lot of what needs doing and what can be done for win-win approaches. So, yes, doing agreements, yes, doing some pilots, but also doing a lot of upscaling of approaches.
I guess there must be projects and so on that are in place now following previous versions of COPs for biodiversity. But like you say, the scale of which isn't as big as it needs to be, in simple words. Okay.
Yes.
And there must be huge amounts of projects that are adding towards those or helping towards the goals that they have set, but it just needs to be upscaled.
Absolutely. Also, if people want to have a look, then the UN Environment Programme are using the hashtag Generation Restoration. So you can search for that and look on their website as well and see some really inspiring examples. Also in the UK itself, there are some great examples. There's some amazing pioneers, the rewilding work that's been done. We're fortunate that we're working with a very forward-thinking landowner, the Spain's Hall Estate in Essex, and they're experimenting with various approaches, including having been the first site in East Anglia to have beavers for 400 years.
Yes.
They've got a beaver release enclosure there, and that's where you see there's so many things need to come together. There's got to be that individual vision, those pioneers, but also you can't expect individuals to do everything on their own. It's not fair. It needs the government approaches. So it's a balance. It's like with climate change, with plastic pollution, there's things we can all do. But one of the things we all need to do is also say to our politicians, we care about this and we expect you to care as well. And we expect you to engage with COP15. And by the way, how's the stuff on climate going after COP26, guys? And getting it on the agenda.
Absolutely. And there certainly seems to be an increased interest from the public in general on, well, climate is a massive thing that the public are interested in, but clearly matters like plastic waste and that kind of thing is fairly hot on the agenda at the moment. And things like pandemics possibly sometimes distract in some way.
It's that interest. Of course, it's got to be the focus, but also these aren't things that happen in isolation. So, the point you made earlier about the value people place on having local green space. There've been scientific studies about that and how people get better faster if they can see trees and other vegetation out of the window of the hospital. There's been studies of that. All of a sudden, it's become real to so many people because it's their direct personal experience of having to be home-based and lockdowns and things like that. And also, one of the factors that places us at greater risk of pandemics and other things that will harm us, like food stability, are looking after biodiversity.
Yeah, it's all connected.
Yes.
So COP15 is going to be a reasonably big event, and I say event not in the in-person event, but in terms of what it means and what it stands for, and the possibilities of the outcomes of that. Would you suggest that there's lots of challenges, and they have to set and start meeting some of these targets, but to be able to do that as an ecologist starting in the field, you would hope that in terms of work, and if there are these targets to reach, which requires people power, I would have thought that there's should be opportunities for ecologists to find work and develop their career in ecology.
Very much so. Just taking the UK alone, there are not enough professional ecologists for the amount of work that needs to be done right now. So never mind that upbuilding that needs to be done. There's the really big projects need a lot of people, but also the new approaches. So biodiversity net gain is it's a requirement already in some local authority areas, but from the Environment Act, we're now in a sort of 2-year period, and towards the end of next year, it will become mandatory across England for the vast majority of projects that need planning permission. And local authorities need ecological knowledge to be able to make that work. It's an approach that, as long as it's done well and alongside existing policy and legal protection, can be a force for good. But there's got to be skill and knowledge behind it, because it is quite a complex approach. And we're in a situation where I can see recruitment is happening, so the numbers are improving. But until quite recently, only about a third of local authorities had an in-house ecologist. And even those that did, that person will often have several other responsibilities as well. So that's something where, if it's going to work, there needs to be knowledge on all sides. Because the local authorities need to spot if something's not been done right. And there will be unscrupulous people out there who try and fudge the figures, potentially. But actually, it's a new approach and people will make genuine mistakes. And somebody needs to be there to check and make sure that things are done right. And also, there's going to be an increasing need for something everyone in environment talks about this, the sooner you get us involved in a big project, the better it is for everybody. And particularly with this sort of new approach, it's increasingly important, because if you put a project in the wrong place, in areas that are very highly sensitive, obviously there's all sorts of policy challenges. But now, because of biodiversity net gain, there's a direct financial implication. Because the more valued habitat that's lost for a scheme, the more compensation you have to find off-site. So putting it in an area that's of low existing value and doing what you can to improve conditions on-site is obviously, we'd say that was the right thing to do ecologically. It's certainly supported by policy, but now there's a direct financial benefit to doing that as well.
I wasn't aware of that. I mean, my knowledge of biodiversity net gain is limited anyway, but that's very interesting to know. I have come across it personally recently because the biodiversity net gain was mentioned in a lot of the materials that were received locally about a solar farm that's being going through planning permission and so on. And that was a key feature of it. I can't remember the percentages now, but there's a net gain percentage involved, which made me quite happy anyway, which it was good to see, because there was a lot of opposition based around the impact it would have on wildlife and so on. But in fact, it was shown to be very, very good for biodiversity. I was very pleased to see that the person who wrote the details of that was a member of SocEnv. So I was very very happy to see that. So I guess they worked for the developer rather than the local authority, but you have to have these experts in the different sides of projects, I suppose.
Yes.
So I'm going to go back to your personal experience. And you may have mentioned part of this already, but obviously you did your degree and your master's degree related to biology. What was it, biodiversity? Biology, sorry. But before that, when did you first develop an awareness or an interest in the environment or biodiversity or ecology more widely?
Basically, I can't really remember not being interested in wildlife. Watching David Attenborough programs was definitely an influence. And it's interesting, it's something David Attenborough has said is what puzzles him isn't why people have a fascination for nature. It's why people lose that fascination for nature. Because certainly, you take any kid pond dipping or hunting for creepy crawlies, and there's a fascination there and an engagement where people have the opportunity. And I know some organisations do actually run adult pond dipping sessions because they realised that people would bring their kids, but if they didn't have small children, they didn't feel they could come and do pond dipping. And they said, well, let's just try an adult thing. And there was a massive demand because, people have that interest. Yeah.
Why not? And again, this goes back to the mention of small city parks and so on. That if that can develop and inspire interest in the environment, and the fact that birds go to those small parks and you don't see them anywhere else, why is that? Why? How can we make that different? And you may well forge a career in something along the lines of ecology and that kind of thing. So I guess with that ingrained interest in the environment, you followed your passion, and that's why you wanted to go down the route of biology and into the environmental side of things.
Yes.
Absolutely good.
At a time when there were very few jobs out there, so it was much more uncertain time
Hmm.
for what I would actually end up doing and whether I could make a career of it.
Absolutely. I won't ask when that was, but
Thank you.
So I guess the fact that you went down the ecology route and so on, that was part of the reason why you joined SocEnv.
Yes.
Initially, was part of that the added recognition that gives you and so on to develop a career?
At that stage, it was actually because the primary driver was joining made the courses half price.
Good.
At the time, I was working for English Nature, what's now Natural England, and the need for a consultant to be a member of something to evidence was still growing, but already quite important. It wasn't so much in other roles at that time, but I knew I wanted to learn, and the courses were cheaper, so why wouldn't you?
It's always good. Yeah. Well, you have to make the most of all the opportunities that these things give you.
But yes, the professional recognition, and also as I become more involved, particularly because I've been a fellow for over a decade now. And one of the good things about that is obviously there's an added recognition, but it's helped me with getting engaged with SocEnv in terms of joining some really interesting conversations on SocEnv's behalf.
And that professional recognition is quite a key theme that we're seeing at the moment at the Society for the Environment.
Yes.
Within consultancies in particular, but as well as other sectors and organizations as well. But to become a senior consultant and that kind of thing, chartership is ingrained in that in many instances, which we're clearly quite pleased to see, because of it allows us the knowledge that the people that are in those positions have gone through the process of chartership. They're able to showcase they're up to date with their high level of knowledge in environmental matters. But I guess it also provides a reasonable goal for professionals to go towards to help them develop their career. And I think that's good in so many different ways. Is it similar in Atkins?
Yes, it's something that we are expected to support junior colleagues in working towards, and everybody does. It's the interesting thing where in things like engineering or landscape architecture, being chartered is just totally there as a professional step. Other environmental disciplines, it feels almost like we're catching up to a degree. We are younger professional institutes. So I think there are people who, at my stage in their career, there's the slide, well, I was an ecologist before anyone was chartered, so why should I need to be now? But for more junior people, they can see the benefits. And also, I don't know, there's a real why wouldn't you? It's evidencing the level you're working at. And also it's helping to ensure our professions are taken seriously. It's just saying, yes, we are talking to chartered engineers, chartered surveyors. And I wouldn't have thought that I've not had the situation of somebody sort of looking down on me because I have different letters after my name from them.
No.
But it doesn't hurt. It's in the same way I'd wear a business suit into a business meeting. It's that there is something about credibility in there. That's a very, very superficial example. But yeah, chartership is an important and valued step in people's career, and it shouldn't be seen as a hurdle. If people are feeling daunted by it or seeing it as a hurdle that they're not getting support to get to, then approach their institute, look at getting. I know particularly for small organisations, you don't necessarily have a lot of people doing the same discipline as you. That can be challenging, but I know SocEnv, and I'm sure others as well, have set up systems where you can look outside your own organisation for a mentor.
Yes, absolutely. There are some fantastic mentoring opportunities out there. Off the top of my head, I can't remember which of our professional bodies, our professional members' bodies, offer those opportunities, but there are plenty of opportunities out there. So have a look, have a chat with the institutes, and they might be able to point you in the right direction. But it's a really, really useful way to start looking at what you have actually done and where you are on the process towards chartership or whatever your goal might be. And they may well be able to provide some really good pointers to add those extra bits that you might be missing, that you think, I'm never going to be chartered because I don't have this. Well, even if it's not part of your role, there are opportunities out there, whether it's a bit of additional work here or volunteering there or whatever it might be. And there's probably different ways of thinking about it as well.
Yes.
So that's always really useful. So it's clearly a huge enthusiasm for environmental matters and so on. And you've mentioned the shortage of ecologists. And there's a huge growing demand for the interest in environmental work or environmental challenges, and the fact that we need people in place to address them and provide the opportunities and that kind of thing. What would you say to people who are looking to forge a career in the environment?
Go for it, please. We need you. The world needs you. I think it's really exciting that there have just been announcements about GCSEs in natural history and also a climate-related one. I think those are good. But actually, something that worries me about the education system is doing the 3 sciences is important. Doing sciences at a high level is often important in these sort of roles. Not for all those. Some people come from much more of a geography-focused background. But where you've got schools some schools cannot offer triple science. So you think that's a child, not even in their teens yet, on a path that means if they suddenly discover one of the sciences is a passion for them and they'd love to do it for A-level, there's a big extra hurdle between what they've been taught at GCSE if they've only done single science, or even double, up to then get to the A-levels compared to having done triple science. So having those new ones in, I think that's really exciting. But there's probably other things need doing it with those age groups as well. We shouldn't be complacent. We shouldn't think that solves it. Because, yes, those are important topics, but there's always going to be need for the basic science and people with that focus underpinning it as well.
Yeah. And I guess beyond the youth of today looking into what the next few years of their education might look like to be able to get into this side of this career, there's also people who are transitioning from the jobs that they are in currently, whatever that might be. It could be finance, it could be anything, and they wanting to have more of an impact on the environment, or an impact at all.
Yes.
I guess there's obviously still opportunities for them to learn new skills and to move into an environmental role. Very
much so. There's approaches like apprenticeships coming through, which can include more mature students as well, but also I'd say not to underestimate the skills they've already got. Obviously, it depends on the individual, but taking finance as an example, actually, with the need for all of this upscaling, then having good financial models built into approaches for unlocking the funding and getting investment into improvements for nature, improvements for climate, that's actually a hot topic area. So it may be there are people who think, I've got to go back to square one and learn how to tell all the different newts apart to get into this. Well, there may be another way in that you haven't even thought of. And obviously organisations like SocEnv also using things like LinkedIn. I know people will make contact and just ask a question. And I like helping with things like that because it's hard. It's hard to know if you're already in an organisation, if a parent's already in an organisation or a friend is, then you've got an easy way to fire in questions and find out what a job is like. Yeah. If you don't, then finding those questions out and just going, I don't even know who to ask. It's great to know there are ways out there.
Absolutely. Search on LinkedIn for Ecologist CEnv and you'll find a or CEcol, and you know that you're talking to someone who knows what they're doing, and they're very friendly generally. So
yes,
they'll be able to provide some very useful advice. And admittedly, I mentioned finance as an example there, but it's not like you have to transition from working in finance to working in the environment. That is an option, but we have numerous chartered environmentalists who work in banking and so on. They are finance is what they do, but green finance and green investments is hugely important and absolutely worthy of being a chartered environmentalist. So you don't have to become an ecologist and so on, although Claire would like it to be. But it's there are so many different opportunities in every sector to become. To have an impact on the environment, and you can gain recognition of that. So possibly a poor example to mention that, but
I think a good one, because then picking that up in existing oils, because also again that's one where if the environment isn't taken on board properly, and there are a lot of green investment schemes which is exciting, but also if the people involved need that good understanding. Because otherwise we'll have examples where it's just greenwash. And that's where that poor practice drags everybody else down, because it undermines the credibility. And people will think, oh, well, they're all a bit dodgy.
Yeah.
Because so having that credibility and that knowledge is so valuable.
Absolutely. I have two last questions for you. Firstly, what's next for you?
Gosh, that's a really interesting one. I think it's going to be, some of the exploring is going to be even further into that, away from pure ecology. So obviously things like natural capital, but trying to bring some of that thinking together. One very specific thing is that I'm actually talking about different institutes. I'm acting as co-editor of a forthcoming publication from the ICE, which is the Manual of Blue-Green Infrastructure. So that's the author teams have been very hard at work, and now it's with us and the in-house team to start pulling all of the chapters together. But that in itself, I think, is such a positive sign of how far things have come, that the Institution of Civil Engineers have said this is a topic that is important to our members and important to society, that we want this prestigious publication about.
Absolutely. And we look forward to seeing that. That sounds like a fantastic project to be involved in.
It is. It's really good.
Now, my final question is, and this might go back to education, but we'll see. If you're able to influence world leaders for a day, what would you get them talking about? What would you want them to do?
It's funny. I don't feel I can talk about ecology in answer to that, because there isn't one topic. There's to me, I would say two things. One, be authentic. And the other is, I'm not even sure how to put this, but other people are real. Sometimes I listen to some of the political leadership and it's almost like they're so inward looking, and it's about them and their position and their power and their credibility. And every single person on the planet is just as worthy of that thought. And if people can have that attitude, including the decision makers and the ones with the money and the influence on them, then again, all of these things about climate and biodiversity loss fall into place. Because for me, the wildlife's worth looking after for its own right. But actually, if we don't, our economy and our society will suffer globally. So that's a little bit of a vague answer. And how can you need to say to people, everybody's real, everybody's matters? But there are people out there in positions of power who I wish they got their heads around that concept.
Well, I won't be able. I can't argue about any of that answer. So that's absolutely fine. World leaders, use your ears, listen up. So that was my final question for the podcast. All that's left for me to say is a huge thank you to Claire for spending your time with us this morning. And I will hopefully speak to you again very, very soon. And we look forward to that publication from ICE as well.
Thank you. It's been a really interesting morning. Thank you for the time today.
If you would like to hear more about the Chartered Environmentalist, Registered Environmental Practitioner and Registered Environmental Technician registers, please take a look at our How to Become and Why Become recorded webinars on our website, socenv.org.uk. Or you can find them on our YouTube channel. Just search for Society for the Environment, where you will also find a variety of environmental webinar series and various different insights from our registrants. To keep up with all of the Society for the Environment's latest news, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram using @SocEnv_HQ. You can also find us on LinkedIn. Just search for Society for the Environment with SocEnv in brackets at the end. We will release a new episode of EnvCast on the first Wednesday of each month. So if you're interested in our podcast, please subscribe to hear more from us. You can subscribe and review through a variety of platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Castbox. Before we disappear, we have a special event coming up on the 8th of June, which is the 2022 SocEnv Awards presentation. We're going to be presenting the Environmental Professional of the Year and the Registrant Newcomer of the Year. To find out more about the event and to join us to celebrate environmental professionals at no cost at all, visit socenv.org.uk and you'll find the links on there to the 2022 SocEnv Awards. Thank you for listening or watching on YouTube. We look forward to the next episode next month.